Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us here in the office as we talk about the Seven Stewardships of Revival. And all of these are in this book called Lead Pastor. And we're working through this book, and hopefully then you'll have a playlist that you can watch to help you understand. And the idea behind this book is, what kind of thinking do we need to have in the church that keeps Jesus in the lead? And I know I say that every time, but it's so vital because many, many things can take center stage and not Jesus. And so these are hopefully helpful. And I would say that those of you who are shepherds and you are leaders need to work hard to groom the whole group so that we'll all be thinking alike. And so today, as we can come to this stewardship, this is the way we have made our track. First of all, we started out looking for the grace of Jesus that appears as his life and authority shows up in the church. We call that the stewardship of grace. Please look for those things. And then as we see those things, we embrace them by faith, and we can put them, sometimes they become ministries where we're following up on new souls that are saved, and new people who come to our church are new problems that we're helping people with. Then we always need to continue then with worship. And there we talked about keeping Jesus as our first love. That's a big deal, that we keep Jesus as our first love. And then the fourth stewardship was warfare, and we just finished that because warfare is going to come. Satan doesn't like healthy churches. And so he does everything that he can to pick us apart. And boy, there has to be a lot of discernment between what is Satan's attacks and what is the Father's purging. And so it takes a lot of wisdom during that warfare time. And so there's a number of ways in which God is working with us at that point. So far we've had 4: grace, faith, worship, warfare. Now we're going to do something extremely positive, and that is make disciples. You know, Jesus gave us this awesome command. All authority is given unto me in heaven and earth, he said. While you are going, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. I don't think any of us would be excited about a new baby that God gave us and then just bring him or her home and put him on a doorstep. No, we'd take him in the house. We would feed him. We would care for them. And so it is with God's new converts. Make disciples. And also the operative verse that we're going to be using today is 2 Timothy 2:2. It's my favorite mode of operation. It goes like this. And the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. Of course, we can include ladies in that. But what we're doing here is that the things that we're learning, we commit to the faithful who will be able to teach others also. You know what? I didn't know. I've told you this before. I didn't know these things when I started out in ministry years ago. And so I was just running around like a one-man band, trying to keep up with everybody and make things happen. And after a while, there was too little of me to go around. And I began to realize these verses are meant for us to multiply shepherds. And so while I was often out there running out on the fringe, trying to keep them in church, the faithful were sitting all around me or standing all around me, and I was just going right over the top of them, trying to keep the unfaithful in church. So what it's telling us here is that we as shepherds, we need to spend some time committing to the faithful, the things that are true and the things that we have learned. So our stewardship here is that we disciple the faithful who will teach others. As the authority and the reality of Christ becomes clearly focused when we count the cost and make the choice to walk with the Lord. And by the way, if you'll remember, Last time we talked about warfare, that sometimes warfare can be used by God to separate the sheep from the goats. And when we see faithful sheep go through that time, God's pointing to us to say, disciple them, build them, grow them, teach them. And so, nevertheless, our stewardship in this particular time is to disciple the faithful who will teach others also. It's big. Now, I had a friend say to me not too long ago, he said, your stewardships, they just sound formulaic. Oh, my friend, if you've heard me and you've listened to these things and maybe you think that way, Joe's just formulaic. I'm not, because these 7 stewardships that we will have covered, they come at different times in different ways, and so we're always in the midst of what God's doing with his people, and we're looking for these opportunities. These 7 are just being identified, so we'll have an idea of how to cooperate with the builder of the church, Jesus, with the people that he gives us. So just keep that in mind. This is not meant by me or us in our ministry to be a formula, but these are true dynamics that do happen in a group. I have watched it for decades, and so we just put it together for you to be mindful of them and then use them as you see fit. And I like to say this to groups, and I think it's true. And I didn't know this at the beginning either, but watch my hands. As our ministries grow in number, we need to grow in shepherds. And I have found that when we do that, when we're mindful of that, because let's say you have 200 in church, how are you going to shepherd all those people? How are you going to disciple them? What will you have in place so that each one can be nurtured and continue to grow, even into old age? And so I began to think, okay, as God allows us to add and we grow in numbers, we need to multiply shepherds. And so in my personal ministry, the main focus that I had, along with preaching, was to work on building shepherds. And this is not in scripture. I'm just giving you an idea. I tried to have one influential shepherd, whether male or female, for every 20 people. In other words, I wanted to make sure that every 20 people had a shepherd of influence. And so we worked on that. And Lord allowed us to keep up with it as well. And it really, really helped. And so, discipleship is not cookie cutter. In other words, you just can't run people through a system, because they start in different places, they had different bents, and they like different things, they develop in different ways. And so you need shepherds who are going to take somebody on and work with them. Sunday, just this last Sunday in church, I was able to be back in our home church, and in the place where I normally sat. I got out of my seat and I was kind of heading toward the door, and there was this young man that came down the aisle. And because I'm in and out with our ministry, I came by. I didn't know him, so I put my arm around him and I said, "I don't think I know you, and I don't think I've met you." And so he introduced himself, and then I said, "Hey, how would you like to get a cup of coffee and read the Bible together, or just talk a little bit? I'd like to get to know you." And he brightened up and said he would like to do that. And so as an older pastor in a congregation, seeing people that I don't know, I'm not the lead pastor here, but seeing people that I don't know, reaching out to them and just watching out for their welfare is a dynamic that we need to develop in our local church. So I promise you that if you'll multiply your faithful, you will multiply your ministry. And you know what I like to say? If we are faithful to multiply, I find that God does add, because he knows that if he sends somebody our way, that we're going to take care of them. Okay? I just want to give you a couple ideas here in this session, and that is, don't forget that the older can teach the younger. Along in our ministry, one time I took a church that was much older, and I think the median age was 55 and up. And so a lot of people were giving up on the church because it was just full of gray hairs and so forth. And so I said, all right, how are we going to multiply disciples here? And you know what we began to do? We began to have seminars for grandpas and grandmas. And we began to have outings to interact with them. They hadn't had any discipleship training. They were kind of just there going through the motions. And so as I began to do that, it was amazing. So I began to show them how they could minister to their children. By the way, that particular church in the past had built a beautiful edifice, a building. It was a great building. And they sacrificed for it, but they lost their children in the process. Really true. And so I said, okay, we got to regain the family here. And so I began to teach grandpas and grandmas how to minister to their children and their grandchildren. It worked. And the Lord just blessed it. And we had a dynamic going on there between the older and the younger. And Titus was very clear when that was written, as Paul wrote to Titus, he said, teach the older women this, and they're to teach the younger women this, and the older men are to teach the younger men. That's a great dynamic. So don't ever say, our church is just a bunch of old people. Okay, if you got old people, train them. And you will find that I have found that those senior saints work well, and they cooperate well. And then another thing that we did, and I like this, is that as we continue to grow, I began to talk about living in a discipleship sandwich. What? Live in a discipleship sandwich. Well, what's that mean? Well, it means that everybody thinks this way. I need to be accountable to somebody, and I need to be responsible for somebody. And if this is me, accountable, responsible. And you know what? I'm getting to the age where you can't hardly find anybody older than me. And so, at any rate, but that attitude where you have accountability and responsibility, if everybody has that attitude, you kind of begin to have a discipleship model built in to your existence. Well, we'll do more on discipleship next time, but I just want to encourage you. This fifth stewardship is to make disciples, make a choice, multiply, and I have found God to be faithful, Jesus, in building his church by adding and giving us these people if we'll be faithful to train them. God bless. Thanks for watching.